Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this virtual event from CNBC. I'm Tyler Mathisen. The topic today is At Work, Leadership and Management in Crisis. And what better way to have such an event than virtually, the way we're doing it today. It's not that we planned it this way, far from it, and we would much prefer to be with you all together as we had planned. But in light of what's been going on in our country and around the world, and in light of the way millions of Americans are working and you are working and connecting with your associates and friends and business partners, this is a real showpiece event, a way to explore what can be done well remotely, what can't, and how to lead through crises like this one. Many of the themes we cover at work, which include leadership, how to leverage the latest tech for more productive teams, how to keep teams healthy and thriving, are even more vital right now during this time of crisis. And we brought together some incredibly prescient speakers to talk about the topics to help you navigate, whether you're a large company, a small company, a not-for-profit business, a public institution. We're going to help you get through this uncertainty. Before we talk to our first panelists, and they are going to be tremendous, I promise you, I want to thank our sponsors who have stuck with us throughout this. Let's begin by thanking Workday. This is our third year of working with Workday. They have been with us on At Work since the very start, and we're especially grateful to Workday. Also to Coupa, the Society for Human Resource Management, T-Mobile for Business, and congratulations to T-Mobile for closing their big deal yesterday with Sprint. We're all excited about the possibility that now merged company can bring, and ZipRecruiter. We thank you all very much. And we want to invite all of you to take part in this event. It's kind of a fireside chat. There really is a fire burning in my fireplace behind me. We want you to join the conversation, and you can submit questions here on our website. Just below the video screen, I think there's a little window there that says type a message. Try it. If not, you can connect to us on Twitter at CNBC Events, @ at CNBC Events, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. But it's time to get going here. We appreciate you spending roughly an hour, maybe an hour and a quarter with us this day, wherever you are around the world, whether it is morning, afternoon, or evening. We are glad you are here. Let's talk about leadership in a time of crisis. And to do that, we have two people I can't think of who could be any better than the ones who are going to join us right now. John Chambers is the legendary former chairman and CEO and a good friend of Cisco. Hi, John. It's good to see you. John is now running JC2 Ventures. It's great to be with you. He's now running JC2 Ventures, which is a venture capital company that invests in disruptive startups. And we'll talk about how it's different managing a big company through times of stress and how he's dealing now with his smaller ones. And Daniel Pink is a renowned business thinker and author. Two of his bestsellers are When, which explores the art and science of perfect timing, and Drive, which was a great book that I read a few years ago at the suggestion of his brother, who used to be my boss, Jeremy. Dan, it's great to see you. Drive explores motivation and what makes
Hi, Tyler. Great to be with you.
Dan, it's great to have you here. What I'd like to do, gentlemen, is this. John, I want to start with you and let you riff a little bit. And maybe I'll ask a couple of follow-up questions to you. And then I'll turn to Dan for his reactions to what you've just said. So let's do this. Okay. You had to manage Cisco through several times of crisis, whether it was the Asian financial crisis, the dot-com bust, 9/11, the financial crisis of a decade ago, various forms of epidemic around the world, whether it was SARS or the other ones that have come up. What did you learn by doing that? What worked and what didn't? What were the 1, 2, or 3 things that were critical to make Cisco come out maybe even stronger on the other side?
Uh-oh, we just dropped, guys.
Yeah, no, we got you back, John. There you are. We got you. There, John, I think we have you. Nope, we went away. Dan, do you have a signal there? Can you hear me? Why don't I pick up with you and we'll bring John back in? If you were to analyze the things that are the most important things companies can do in times of stress or crisis, what would they be? What separates the good ones, the good leaders, from the less good leaders?
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of things. Tyler, at the outset right now, I think that one of the core imperatives for any leader now is to take care of employees, to make sure they're okay, and to make sure they have the tools and everything they need to be productive and be able to do their highest priority tasks. I think that's going to be crucial in the long term, because those employees are going to be ambassadors to your customers, particularly in service industries, and they're going to be sources of innovation and new processes coming forward. For me, one of the things that I think about is how leaders actually talk to people. And I think there's some lessons here. Right now, I think there's a premium on candor, that leaders should be candid. They should be saying, I don't know. They should be telling the truth as they know it. They should be human. Being human is enormously important here. We should never resort to corporate doublespeak, but this is one of those cases where talking like a human being is really important. I keep hearing reports of companies that are firing people by robocalls, firing people by emails. That is the wrong thing to do. I don't want to hear anybody say, I regret any inconvenience this has caused you. And we also, at the same time, I think people want to see a path through to leaders. It's very important that these messages come from the leaders themselves, that people have the transparency, which I think John will want to talk about. Transparency is a sight line, so that the people in organizations can see you as a leader, as someone who is candid, who is empathic, who is telling the truth, and who offers some hope.
John, we've got you back, and I hope you heard much of that answer. If you didn't, I'll try and paraphrase it here. Dan said, basically, be there, be out front, be transparent, and take care first of your employees. I assume you would share all of those views, but go back to my original question. Tell us what lessons you learned from the crises that you had to manage through that worked and maybe didn't work.
Well, Tyler, I think it's why your program today is so appropriate. There hasn't been a major crisis for 12 years. And so most of the leaders that are going through this today in big companies or small governments or nonprofits have not seen it. And the pattern is remarkably predictable. To Dan's point, number one, don't hide. Be visible. As a leader, be okay with saying, I don't know. Then what you need to do is, this is all about leadership. A number of the startups are going to fail in this downturn. A number of the big companies are going to fail also. So what your organization expects of you, your employees, your customers, your shareholders, is to outline a very visible plan for how you're going to manage through it. What are the 5, 6, or 7 major programs you're going to do, each of which will allow you to achieve your North Star, the outcome you want at the end of the downturn. Those often separate into how you interface to your employees, as Dan articulated well. How do you interface to your customers? How are you going to do cash preservation and expense management? What are you going to do differently through the changes? And how are you perhaps going to do 1 or 2 wild cards during the changes that position you even better for the future? You then say, here's what we look like 18, 24 months out. Here's the programs we're going to run. You get back to your employees, your customers, your partners, and you navigate through it. To your point in your opening comments, we did that in the late 90s with the Asian financial crisis, and at the time everybody withdrew from Asia. We doubled down. 18 months later, we were number 1 in every country. 2001, I got surprised. Shame on me for not seeing it, but we made all of our changes in 51 days, painted a picture of what would look like when we came out, made the changes before most of our peers even moved, and we broke away from our peers at that time and gained more market share than before. 2008, Great Recession. This time we saw it coming. We prepared ourselves for the future, and we actually interfaced both to our employees and our customers in a unique way, including extending credit to all the automotive companies worldwide. Once again, number 1 position. That's what I'm doing with all my startups, all 18. That's what I'm doing when I talk to venture capital portfolios.
So, John, let me have a quick follow-up question here. As I'm understanding you, obviously, as a leader, one's immediate focus is on the immediate problems that you're facing, your workforce, your supply chain, your customers, and addressing that. But you seem to be suggesting that that good leadership means looking over the hill and looking strategically to the company that emerges from this crisis?
Tyler, you worded it better than I did. What you want to do, you don't want to make a series of moves on the chessboard. You want to outline what it looks like to the end. This is what leadership is about. Your employees want to believe in you. They want to see that you're sincere, as Dan said. They want to see your strategy to get there with regular reviews back, and they want to be led. And so you've got to picture what you look like at the end, not just each individual move. So it's important to get the patient off the emergency room bed, but you've got to really say, here's what we look like as we recover. So I think your summary of it was excellent.
You know, Dan, here comes a question from one of our audience members, and it goes back to something you said earlier. It's not enough to say, I'm sorry, this is an inconvenience to you. And there are certain things that you can assure and certain things that you can't assure your employee base. And here's a question that really goes to the heart of it. How does someone handle not being able to assure their employees that they will have a job when it's all over?
I think you say precisely that, Tyler. I don't think you BS your way around it. I think you say, if I'm a leader, listen, I'm trying the best I can. We're going to do everything we can to preserve jobs. We're going to do everything we can to serve our customers as well as we possibly can. But we are in uncharted waters right here. And so I'm going to be as candid with you as possible. The other thing that I think is important, and actually John Chambers is a great example of that, in the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, John famously took only $1 base salary for a couple of years, paid all of his expenses. I think that what leaders have to do is say, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. If you're going to take a hit, we're going to take a hit, and I'm going to take a hit as a leader. And you see this now with several public company CEOs reducing their salaries, eliminating their base salaries. You see in certain companies, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents reducing their salaries. I think that's the way to be credible in a world of uncertainty.
Is that more than a symbolic gesture, Dan? And then, John, I want to get your thoughts on that, having done it. Why is that important? Dan?
Because what you don't want, and already, before the coronavirus, what you had even in times of low unemployment, a fair amount of discontent in the workplace. We had unemployment rates at 3.5%, but 65% of the country thinking that the country is going in the wrong direction. If you look at measures of workplace engagement that Gallup does, 7 out of 10 people are not engaged in their work. You had surprisingly widespread distrust in leadership at the rank and file level. And so what you want to avoid any notion of unfairness. You want to avoid any notion that there's certain rules for people at the top and certain rules for people in the rest of the organization. One of the most important things that you see when leaders who are forged in crisis is that they convey that we are all in this together. And being all in it together means that everybody plays by the same set of rules. So yes, for people who are enormously wealthy, $1 a year salary has a degree of symbolism. But when you cascade it down to the VP level, I think it becomes meaningful and credible. And to Tyler, your point right here, we are in a world of uncertainty. And the way you deal with a world of uncertainty is you say, we're in a world of uncertainty. We're going to try our best. I'm going to seek advice from you, from everybody on this team. We're in this together. We're all going to be treated fairly.
John, let me read something out of this morning's New York Times. A company, and I will not name the company, but one can go to the New York Times and find it, summoned people to a video conference call on Friday morning, says the Times, with just an hour's notice. On the call, the voice of an unidentified executive, explained that their jobs had been eliminated. A slide outlined the terms: a month of severance pay, 3 months of medical benefits, and 1 year to exercise their stock options. Is that the way to do it?
Absolutely not. And one of the fun things about not being in charge of a public company, I can be remarkably candid. I think it starts with treating other people like you like to be treated yourself. Secondly, if you do have to make changes, and I think a number of organizations will do it, you outline to your organization why you have to make it. You treat everybody like you'd like to be treated yourself. It's more than symbolism when you take $1 a year pay and pay for the expenses. It's saying, I'm going to be part of your team. And then don't hide. Communicate to the point you just made very openly. It should be the leader leading at this point in time and being very candid. The employees, and we did have to lay off people at Cisco in 2001. This was my family. I hired everybody but 22 people there at that time out of 40,000. We tried to treat our team like we wanted to be treated ourselves. We were very articulate. The leadership took the lead, and the CEO had to lead by example. We shared with people what we were doing. We tried to be as generous as we could to be able to position these families who were being so badly affected by this for their future. We helped them get the jobs. We treated, and people forget, it isn't just about the people that you let go. It's the people that stayed. Did they view that you did it fairly? Did you lead by example as you go forward? Then you paint how long you think it's going to last. It always lasts longer than you think it will. I think this one will be 3 to 5 quarters. I hope it would go down and back up, but I don't think so on that. And then you're transparent. One of the things that Dan and I are both outlining, there's a general playbook, but you've got to adjust it based on the company. I have probably a fourth of my startups that are going to power right through this. It doesn't mean we aren't going to do expense reductions, but we sure aren't going to do layoffs unless we get surprised. So outlining that to the employees, we've got plenty of money in the bank. Here's our plan of where we're going to go. We're going to treat people fairly. We're going to lead by example. This is no longer about capitalism and survival. We owe an obligation to society. We'll go back like Bloom Energy did, one of my companies, and help rebuild respirators to help the people that are sick. We're giving time and keeping people on that could have been laid off otherwise. However, there will be some that are going to have to reduce dramatically their head count. And as the stimulus package did not help the venture capital backed companies very much at all, they're going to have to do it fairly quickly. So treat people like you'd like to be treated yourself. Do it once. It kills an organization to do it one step, second step, third step, and you lose credibility as a CEO. But go back to, here's my best call, here's my best strategy, here's the call I'm making at this point in time, and treat people like it was treating a friend, like Dan was talking to me, or Tyler, you were talking to me when you let me go. If you treat me fair, I'll know that.
All right, Dan, let me turn to you with another audience question, and it's an interesting one, particularly in light of the wrinkles that have been raised by how we're working now. A lot of us are working remotely. Millions of us are working from home. How do you manage performance? Asks this questioner. How do you manage performance and give critiques of workers who are working remotely through a crisis like this?
That's a very, very difficult question. I mean, I don't think we have a great answer to that. Remember, there was remote work going on well before this crisis, and in general, we still hadn't had a set of great practices to deal with that. My view is pretty simple. Regular communication, and try to give people feedback that is regular, reasonably, and don't resort to formal feedback processes. Regular feedback, somewhat informal, and that the one thing we know from a pile of research about feedback in any setting, remote or otherwise, is that when feedback works, it doesn't matter so much whether it's positive or negative. It matters whether it is instructive. It matters whether people actually have something practical and specific and tactical they can do. So the more you can coach people into practical ways to help, the better off you're going to be. But again, this is a massive experiment on doing that on a broad scale. And one of the things that I think will come out of this is a re-reckoning of what kind of work should be done collaboratively, what kind of work should be done individually, what sort of work should be done synchronously, what sort of work should be done asynchronously, what sort of work do we need people to physically together, what sort of work do we need people to be distributed. And I think that if leaders actually have somebody on their team who's paying attention to that, who's watching how this unfolds, that when they come out on the other side, as John suggests, they might actually have some good refinements in processes and procedures that they can use going forward.
Well, that's how I'd like to sort of conclude our conversation and tee up the next one, which is coming. And I'll start with you, Dan, if I might. What is work likely to look like? How will it be different on the other side of this crisis? How will we be forever changed?
You know what, Tyler? I mean, it's a great question, and I have to say, abiding by John's and my principles of candor, I don't think we know. I certainly don't know. We just don't know whether, we've got these playbooks for how to deal with crises like these, but I'm not sure we know what game we're playing right here. If you look at the unemployment figures that have come out, if you look at the constant drumbeat of deaths that are happening right now, if you look at the fact that 80% of people in the United States are essentially sequestered in their home, we don't know what that's going to be like. I think what we want to do is we want to live by values, the values of candor, as we've talked about a lot, and the values of, even though it's a little bit soft, of care, of taking care of each other as much as we can. The way I would look at this, and the leaders who I've talked to, I've said something like this. If you're a leader, you're the first line of your obituary may be how you responded to this crisis. So if you use that way of thinking about things, I think that ultimately leaders will do the right thing for their company and for the world.
No doubt, John, this is a defining moment for leaders of companies large and small. How do you see work being different when we get through all of this? What are we likely to take away or learn?
Well, to the first point that I think both of you articulated well, you're more a product of a leader on how you handled your challenges than you are your successes. Jack Welch taught me that over 30 years ago. Secondly, I think the nature of work is going to change forever. We at Cisco almost invented this video capability after the bird pandemic flu, where I was in Mexico City with the president of Mexico, when we thought it was going to be a terrible, terrible death rate and spread dramatically as a pandemic. It did not, but it became obvious you had to be able to isolate as this occurs. Having watched it this time, remember 15 years later, I think the nature of work is going to change forever. You're going to be able to do call centers where you can be at home. You can have artificial intelligence agent help you walk through the calls with your customers. You can focus on your summary at the end, and all of a sudden you build in a flexibility and make that job even better with tremendous productivity advantages. Secondly, watching my startups, we do probably 10 to 15 Zoom, Google Hangouts, WebEx sessions a day. It will change. They are more comfortable with being able to look at who's talking and may even stay with video completely when they're in their own workplace in terms of direction. So I think there'll be a fundamental change of work enabled by this type of technology, but combining new technologies, the Internet of Things, digitization, artificial intelligence to do it. So I think the nature of work will change dramatically. But the key takeaway in the end, as a leader, it's about culture and how you walk the talk and how you handle your challenges in life.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. A very great kickoff to our session today. John Chambers, thank you. Dan Pink, really great to see you again. Fantastic.
A pleasure. Dan, a pleasure. Tyler, a pleasure.
Thank you very much, guys. Our next session really picks up from where Dan and John just left off. It's called New Realities at Work. Is this what the future looks like? Who would have thought? I sure wouldn't have thought that I would be doing this from my family room. I wouldn't have thought that my wife, who works at the Today Show, would be producing the fourth hour of the Today Show from our kitchen island with the technology that we have there, whether she's using multiple iPhones or a McCurdy system that enables her basically to have the control room of NBC News right here in my home in suburban New Jersey. And across every industry, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, a lot of people are working from home and learning new ways of doing things, whether you're using Zoom or WebEx or Google Gatherings or whatever their names are. But how is it going to change us? How are we going to be different? Are we seeing the future? Are we living it right now? Our next session was taped earlier this week and led by my friend and neighbor, John Ford. He is the co-anchor of Squawk Alley, and he is also anchoring from home. Let's listen in to a fascinating conversation. John.
The global coronavirus pandemic has exposed some hard truths about how we work, and it's raised questions about what types of work societies value. I think it's also given a look at how things can go wrong if companies and governments don't plan better for the future. So let's get into that with a great conversation. Carmine DeCivio is Global Chairman and CEO of EY, the global professional services firm, and Elizabeth Reynolds is Executive Director of MIT's Task Force on the Work of the Future and Executive Director of the MIT Industrial Performance Center. Guys, great to have you both.
Great to be here.
Thank you, John.
Carmine, let's start with this crisis that we're in right now. You guys at EY have such a broad look at business and impacts. Is it changing anything about how you expected work to evolve over the next 10 years?
Yes, it's changing many things, John. If I talk a little bit about EY first, EY, we're over 300,000 people worldwide. And fortunately for us, we've invested in technology and we're able to work remotely. So we haven't really lost a beat in terms of working with clients, being able to interact internally, using technology like this, from home, and helping our clients get through this. So it has changed. We're pretty much all working from home now around the world. And fortunately, we invested in technology like Microsoft Teams, like Skype, like some of the others, and they've been godsends through this last month or so.
And Elizabeth, from your end, you have been looking from a broad economic perspective, even from the urban planning perspective, at how work is going to pan out in the future. Right now in this crisis, I don't see robots stacking store shelves. I didn't see artificial intelligence modeling to prepare for this in 2020. Does this crisis show that maybe frontline workers are more valuable than some assumed? And what changes, if so, might we need to put in place so that the future doesn't look as bleak as it might?
Well, you're absolutely right that for all of the fears of the robots are coming, the reality is, certainly in this crisis, the frontline workers who matter are indispensable, and a lot of the work they're doing just couldn't be done by robots. Certainly, robotics could help with some of the safety aspects, but when you think about the folks who are cleaning their buildings, the folks who are serving the food, all of the supply chain for food and for other critical essential items, we've needed workers. And in the best circumstances, we have technology augmenting workers and helping those workers in doing this work. But we are definitely in a position where we've seen the challenge right now for a lot of these workers who are working in conditions that are really dangerous, and folks who have been sent home, is that our social safety net really hasn't been, is not adequate for protecting the most precarious workers. So our low-wage workers, our contract workers, gig economy workers, all in a very dangerous position. And so I think there's definitely a lot of discussion, and even in the stimulus bill, our 20th century institutions that were built to support a certain kind of work really have to be reformed for the 21st century so they really extend and protect more workers.
Yeah, Carmine, what about that? Is this a kind of in case of emergency break glass moment where, yeah, we have stimulus, we have, short-term fiscal policy changes, but really that's just to get us out of this hole and then it's back to life as usual? Or is this a game-changing moment? And if it is a game-changing moment, exactly how is this changing the game?
Yeah, so John, I do think it's a game-changing moment, but some of this depends on what sector you're in and which employees we're talking about. So, even today, about 30% of the American people have the ability to work from home. They haven't been forced to work from home, and it's been more of a luxury as opposed to a necessity. Now, obviously, with the coronavirus, it's a necessity. So in fields like consulting, like our field, and field in technology and so forth, we've all had the ability to work from home. It's been used sparingly, but used. Today, we're using it all the time. In other sectors and other fields, I think that has to get much more built up, and I do think that's where the game changing does come into play. Technology has transformed many businesses, but it's got a long way to go, because honestly, in all the different sectors, there's much more that can be done remotely. There's much more that can be done using technology, including frontline workers, where we can do more as time goes along here. So I do think it's a game-changing moment. I don't think that all of a sudden there aren't going to be office buildings and things like that. But I do think in certain industries, technology, we keep talking about technology. The need for these companies to transform themselves, to be able to use technology, Internet of Things and so forth, even with supply chains, it will help this kind of situation. So, I hate to give you a bit of a hybrid answer, John, but I do think it will be a change. It'll be much more of a change for certain sectors that haven't invested in technology and haven't been using it versus others. I mean, and there is a point here around efficiency and productivity. So think about the commute time people have. On average, I think people commute, it's 225 hours a year. That's the estimate in terms of an average commute time. Now that time is all your time. So there are definitely some positives in terms of, how to work going forward. But I don't think it's going to be, all of a sudden there are no office buildings and we get up every day and we go into a room and sit there all day, because that's not who we are. That's not who humans are. So it'll be a hybrid, but I do think it'll be transformational.
Yeah, Liz, I like people. I've realized. I guess I knew that already, but this is reminding me at the value of rich interaction. If say I'm a professional services firm and I'm interacting with people over video conference, but my competitor is actually sitting down, taking them out to lunch, taking them to a Giants game, a Mets game, boy, I'm going to lose, right? So I wonder about that, if there are going to be enough incentives that people are really going to fundamentally change a lot of how they work. I also wonder, though, maybe you can help with this. Was there a previous major global event that had a lasting impact on how we work? I mean, maybe even if it wasn't global, maybe there are, social safety net legacies of previous events, but are there things that as we think out into the future and plan, we should use as benchmarks and as measuring perhaps how this is going to affect us, or should?
Well, certainly there are other, critical moments in this country's history as well as around the world that are very instructive about what happened during that period. The Depression obviously comes to mind, and a lot of enormous investments and productivity that came out of that time. We think about Roosevelt introduced the Rural Electrification Act, and the rural areas went from 10% of electrification to 90%. And so, what's an equivalent today that we might think about? I think about universal broadband and access to digital, because that's really going to help increase productivity and bring all members of society into the digital economy. But I also think that we've had telecommunications infrastructure for decades, and this idea that the death of distance, we were all going to work remotely, and that was going to, as Carmine said, we're going to free up a lot of time, and this was going to be a whole new way of working. It hasn't panned out that way. In fact, it's been the opposite, that we've had this concentration of people and talent and technology in certain places. And in fact, there's been, we can point out to the super cities, if you will. And that's because that we know that there's a lot that comes from the interpersonal, a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas, a lot of serendipity that we probably won't want to give up. I agree that we will have some hybrid, that I think people who have never worked remotely will have become more comfortable with it. People will understand probably that I don't need to travel across the country for a 2-hour meeting. Maybe I should just stay home. That will have implications, obviously, for different industries and how people work. And I think importantly, there's potential here for an increase in innovation in distance learning. We are all, we're seeing every educational institution trying to figure out how we're going to teach our students. And there's a real opportunity to learn how to do that better. We do a lot of work at MIT, and I think there's a real commitment to figuring out how to expand that, how do we evaluate and make sure it's producing the results we want. And so there's a real opportunity, I think, on that front to increase access and to increase kind of online distance learning for people who may not have the means or the ability to go to the 4-year college. What can we be doing with online learning to help create, better pathways for those folks?
And Carmine, let's talk about policy for a moment, because I think companies, many of whom are your clients, I imagine, have the capability to advocate for government policy in whatever jurisdictions they operate. Right now, there is talk about social safety net, about fiscal help for certain groups that don't have the sort of flexibility and resources available during a time like this. Are there policies that you think companies, executives, leaders should be advocating for so that in the future, the customer base for various industries is maintained or isn't caught in a lurch? Is it time to be thinking about that sort of thing policy-wise now?
Yeah, John, I do think well, I certainly think it's time to be thinking about it. Look, this virus, this situation is going to teach us many, many things. And I do think there are going to be many things on the policy front that should be looked at, including, we talk about having a redundancy program for your business. Well, now, I think that's going to change as well. It's not just around having some offsite somewhere that you never go to. It's going to be something much more real. So I do think there are going to have to be some policy changes to really help companies and to help guide companies to where they really need to be. It's interesting what Elizabeth was saying in terms of online learning and so forth as well. And that's something, our online learning courses in terms of upskilling our people, Elizabeth, is up 42% since the crisis started. Now, obviously, they might have more time and so forth, but they also have the ability to do it. And to me, we are in this debate on the educational sector in terms of what has to change, what's not going to change. I do think looking at this by sector is probably a good way to look at it, including looking at policies, John, because I think sectors are in different places on this. Obviously, my field, professional services, technology, we're way ahead on this type of thing, but many others aren't, including education. I think there's so much more that can be done from an educational standpoint as well.
Liz, last word here. In terms of policy and impact, this has touched and opened up so many lines of communication that I think ideas, themes that go way beyond this crisis, whether we're talking about the health system, we're talking about frontline workers, knowledge workers, versus those who are working with their hands, the gig economy. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Transportation. What do you think are just a couple of takeaways, long-term planning-wise, policy-wise, things that people really need to zero in on and perhaps this crisis crystallizes that otherwise they might miss?
Well, one of the things that we've been focused on on the task force for the work of the future is that it's obviously not just one thing, but and it's not man versus machine. It's man and machine. And so I think broadly speaking, we want to think about policies where we're investing in workers and providing the security and the investment for their education and skills, but we're also investing in technology. And as Carmine said, many, some industries are way ahead on this, a lot of them are not. And we have this, some of our colleagues have come up with this term socio-technology that, for all the technology around us, you would have expected before this crisis, higher rates of productivity in this country, higher growth rates. And I think that we haven't seen those in part because we haven't been investing in the kind of technology that's using technology to augment workers, not just substitute them so that we're marginally, getting rid of some labor costs, but really looking at technology as an asset, as a tool that can help augment workers and shaping how we use technology for the future. And so I think this is an opportunity. Usually, during contractions, firms are rethinking how they do things, how they might invest in technology, redo, their business models. This is a time for us to think about how can these new technologies really augment workers, increase productivity, and create a much more harmonious system, certainly in this country, going forward, so that workers can really be on a path forward towards shared prosperity.
Well, this is definitely giving us plenty of time by ourselves to think about that and a lot more. Liz, Carmine, thank you for the great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
And that was John Fort, and he will rejoin us in just a few minutes. Fascinating conversation with Liz, Carmine, and John. Our next panel is called Resilience at Work, And in it, we're going to explore the angles of stress, mental health, and performance. And our moderator today is Sharon Epperson, a personal finance correspondent for CNBC, joining us from her home north of New York. And Sharon, welcome. I can't think of anyone who has probably faced up against as much anxiety and stress as you do. I hope you don't mind that I mentioned that you live in New Rochelle, which was really the early epicenter of this crisis in New York State. What was it like?
Yes, well, I've been in my home since March 10th, and I do live in the area that was at one time the containment zone. And now everyone is doing what we have been doing since that time, which is staying at home, social distancing, only going out to go to the grocery store or to take a run or a walk. And people are really coping with it well. I mean, they seem to be, at least in terms of protecting one another. They're keeping their distance, they're staying inside. And it's difficult sometimes to be stuck at home for this period of time, which is what we're going to talk about a bit, and how you cope with that and work as well. But we're all dealing with it, and I think New Rochelle has been extremely resilient in this time.
Yeah, no, it absolutely has. Give my best to your husband and your family. And never before, absolutely, I must say, have so many wonderful bookcases been seen on so many TV screens across America. Is in the running.
We have an author in my house, so there are a lot of authors in our worlds, right? So that's what happens.
That's right. We were just with Daniel Pink. As you point out, you've been sort of shut in for about 3.5 weeks, and now we apparently have about 4 more weeks to go, at least in New York State. And so the stress and on a variety of levels can be triggered. The longer you're cooped up, the more you're in your confined space. And it can manifest feelings of anger and anxiety, and for teams that can mean decreased efficiency. It can mean a variety of social issues that can crop up, and that's what you're going to talk about with your 2 guests. One is Dr. Laura Marquez. She's a psychologist and the founder director of the Community Psychiatry Program at Mass General and Harvard Medical School. And Bill Duane is the former head of wellbeing at Google. That's a nice title, Bill Duane. And he's the founder of Bill Duane Associates. Sharon Epperson, the floor is yours.
Well, I want to start with you, Luana, and let's just kick it right off talking about anxiety, fear, stress, and looking at actually how this manifests itself. What's the neuroscience behind it? We're dealing with it, but what are we really dealing with? Sometimes it's easier to battle something that you're feeling if you understand where it's coming from and why it makes you feel the way you do.
Absolutely, Sharon. What we know from a scientific perspective is when there is a real threat, and right now all of us are facing a real threat, COVID-19, that our body goes on fight or flight. There is a fear response that happens naturally and actually quite quickly. Immediately, our limbic system goes on, our emotional part of our brain, and gets us ready for fight, flight, or freeze. What it does, the consequences really is that what happens is our thinking brain decreases and we really can't focus. So one of the things that we're seeing right now is a lot of us working from home, a lot of our workforce is hitting against this wall when they're trying to be productive, they're trying to do a lot, and really they don't have as much brain capacity, as much thinking capacity as they had before, because we're really under the pressure of a real threat right now.
That real threat is coming twofold that we have never seen at this level. We have a health crisis, we have disease, death, constantly hearing more and more about that. And then we also have the economic ramifications and the financial crisis that many individuals and families are facing. And so that creates even more anxiety. How, Bill, do you find well-being in a situation like this? How do you deal with anxiety yourself as a leader, and how do you deal with it for your workers as well?
Yeah, on the individual level, one of the things that I think is really amazing is that we have this biological predisposition towards a stress response in the face of threat or perceived threat. That's the reality. Everybody goes through it. So one is, this is not a character flaw. If you've been feeling anxious, you're not doing this poorly. You're having a natural and reasonable response to economic distress, to health distress, to relationship distress. So the good news is that there are things that you can do to actually downregulate yourself, and given that we're social creatures, to downregulate each other. So what this is can be whatever actually makes you feel more calm. This can be exercise, sleep, meditation. The list is really, really long about what works. So the key is to find what works for you. And in the context of the workplace is to realize that this is not optional. I think historically in the workplace, we viewed emotions like anxiety and fear and anger as complexity that is to be removed, right? Instead, as in work groups, what's needed to deal with this complex, ambiguous situation is clear, calm thinking, empathy, innovation, creativity. We have a big crisis to get through, but also some possibility of making real positive systemic change. And in order to do that, we actually need to accommodate these challenging emotions and not suppress them.
You know, on a lighter note, we also need to do things that make ourselves feel good, right? So right now, I'm smiling, I'm happy because you have the coolest glasses on, Bill, that I've ever seen. And I'm wearing red because I want to feel happy. You know, it's the little things that we do. The sun in New York is shining. So, you know, we have great weather right now today in this area. So those little things we cannot take for granted. And I wanted to ask you, Luana, you know, how important is it to find things, since we're not at the workplace, find resources and actual resources if you have to share with us, but also things that we can do ourselves, like getting dressed in the morning, putting on real clothes, even though you're not going into an office. Does that really help? I mean, does it really help?
Mm-hmm. Sharon, absolutely. I actually think one of the things I've been talking, I think a lot of the things I've been talking a lot with my patients, my coworkers, and with companies is that we're moving from this acute stressor to really a chronic stressor. And our body's on this heightened response. And so we need to do anything to bring that response down. That's one of the things we have control. And I really think one of the tips is really to anchor in a new norm. And that new norm has to sort of be baseline on what you did before. So if you're getting up in the morning, putting your clothes on, getting dressed made you feel good before, you can't let that go right now. You really need to anchor on the things that you know, small little things that you can do every moment that brings more dopamine into your brain, that gets you feeling happier, that gets you in that moment. At home, we've been cooking more and dancing more and doing little things that I know brings my family system down. And I think Bill is right. We need to be able to regulate ourselves so that we can regulate those around us. And in terms of resources, I highly recommend the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. It's an evidence-based association that has amazing resources, as well as the Harvard Medical School Coping with COVID-19 website. There's 4 amazing webinars there that you can really get state-of-the-art, how to get yourself feeling better in this moment right now.
That's excellent advice. That's excellent advice. And, you know, there are a lot of major companies that have behavioral health benefits and also have them through telehealth now, through telemedicine. And Bill, is that something that employees should be using? And have you found that many employees and many workers don't even realize it exists and haven't been using it? Can they use those resources now? And if they don't have them available at their companies, what other resources would you suggest?
Yeah, one is that these are absolutely resources that are useful and in many cases science-backed, but also underutilized. One of the positive aspects of the difficulty we're going through is I think most of us know in our own lives that when we make fundamental change, many times it takes difficulty to actually get us off our autopilot and try something else. So my hope is that the difficulty that people are experiencing really leads people to access these resources. And the ones that Luana mentioned are fantastic. I also think that mindfulness and meditation apps like 10% Happier has a really good COVID program. But to your point is the one that works, the best one is the one that you actually do and the one that works. If reaching for joy and laughter and admiring my glasses, and by the way, Luana's glasses game is also extremely strong.
Yeah, she does have good glasses. That's true.
Yeah, and also I think exposure to media. You know, I've found myself really, really drawn in, and I noticed that it's increasing my anxiety level. So I've been on purpose looking for resources for different kinds of media to consume. John Krasinski from The Office has the Good News Network that he's putting on. David Byrne from Talking Heads has a website that says Reasons to Be Cheerful. Dolly Parton is reading the world bedtime stories as part of her program for encouraging child literacy. All those things are fantastic, but the key takeaway is find something that uplifts you and then do it. It's much more important the one that you do than the one that you should do. And most importantly, don't turn your fear and anxiety into another arena for beating yourself up, right? Can you meet your difficulty with a sense of kindness and softness and not self-harshness?
Bill and Laura, I have a question.
Bill, I think that's so important.
Deb was asking, oh, sorry, I just want to get to this one question from a viewer, Luana, and maybe your answer will dovetail on this. She asked why we still call empathy a soft skill. And she believes that it's imperative for leaders to have that today. I think one of the things I'd love each of you to touch on in the few minutes we have left is what language should leaders be using as they're dealing with employees who are facing anxiety for themselves, for their family members, for the roommates that they never thought they were going to see, but now they're with them 24/7 for the next 4 weeks. What do they do? What is the actual language that you use as a manager to your employees to make them feel better or to help them cope? And how do workers and colleagues deal with one another in a way that is empathetic and is the actual language that might make them feel okay about what's going on?
I think it's crucial for us.
Go ahead, Luana.
Sorry. I think it's crucial for us to be able to actually listen and validate and really normalize the emotional experience. I think we talked a lot today about the idea that the fight or flight response is normal. We're all having it, and that some anxiety is actually adaptive. So I've been talking to my staff about acute and chronic stressor. And under chronic stressor, you're going to have a lot of emotions. Allow those emotions to exist and reach out to people. Try to really not push your emotions away, because that just makes them much worse. And so as a manager, you have to create space for this so that people really feel like they are part of a team. They feel held, and you have to have empathy. Absolutely. Excellent.
Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, particularly to the viewer's comment that this is not optional. If we want, as Luana pointed out, is that our ability to cope decreases the stronger that our stress response is. And we're all going through the common experience of having that go way into the red line. So merely as a matter of functioning during a crisis, it is not optional to manage this. And that includes managing emotions skillfully and meeting it skillfully. And when it comes to work, this is not optional. Right now, we have to, in order as work groups to get through this, we have to have calm, clear reasoning. We have to have trust. We have to have compassion. And those are not optional. In addition, once we're through this crisis, there's this real possibility for systemic positive change. And in order to see that, we actually have to have all of these different amounts of creativity. So for instance, we're having a global experience of interdependence and interconnectedness. We're seeing that some of our key systems are quite brittle, and it's very clear that we're going to need an effort after this crisis part is over that's going to make the Marshall Plan look small. In order to accomplish that, we actually really have to harness our emotions and be ready to step into that world of positive change.
So who do we need on our team, Luana? Who do we need now to fulfill a role that maybe we took for granted? Maybe we did consider empathy a soft skill. We didn't have anybody who was really focused on that for our employees or for ourselves. Is there some resource to use now? And perhaps it's you, and you can also tell people how to find you, because maybe you'll be the one on their team.
Well, you can find me at www.luanamarquezphd.com or at Dr. Luana Marquez on Twitter. But honestly, who do we need in our team? You need to have the people that you had there before. So your social support, whoever was in your inner circle, you should have them there. But I agree with you, Sharon. A lot of people have resources on being able to do telehealth right now. There's a lot more availability. Many states are mandating insurance to cover it. So I think seeking support, I recommend, again, the ADA as a way to find that correct support, but make sure you have somebody. In fact, before we start, Sharon said, who's taking care of you? And so I have my family on my camp, and I encourage all of you to figure out who is going to be that inner support for you, because we're going to need it.
Bill, who should be on their team? You, of course, as the number one person or one of the number one people on there. How do they find you, and who else should be on their team?
Sure, I can be contacted via my website at www.billdwayne.com. But in addition, I created a list of resources that hopefully will have a way towards getting towards people. And I think, again, is to find the resources that work for you. Google has created its own emotional intelligence program and made that available to the world via a nonprofit called Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, or SILI, that has a lot of resources available. And I think that there's been this view of well-being and sustainable performance as being a nice to have. In order to execute the crisis and to be well positioned strategically for what comes after, is pay attention to emotional intelligence. This has benefits for, one, it's just the right thing to do as a human. Two, it's good for business, it's good for work, and it'll strategically position you for what's to come, which is radically unknown. And the way that you manage a complex system requires all of these skills of emotional intelligence. So my request, my offering, my pleading is not to treat it as optional.
That's exactly right. Bill, one, I thank you so much. This is an opportunity for people while they are at home to be still for a minute. We're not as busy rushing from meeting to meeting, workplace to workplace, child activity to a child activity. We have the time to actually be still and think about how to put into action some of the things that you've pointed out to make sure that we include this when everything is okay again in our lives going forward. Again, it's not optional. Tyler, thank you so much to my guests, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Sharon, thank you very much. And of course, obviously, the message there really is to be present. If you're working, be present at work. If you're with your family, be present. This is the time for that. Let's move from taking care of the human, the emotional well-being of employees, to the practical parts of managing a remote workforce. And for that, we turn back once again to my friend, John Fort.
Working from home. Well, for some, shifting to this new reality might not have required much adjustment at all. But for others, I think it's fair to say the work from home allure quickly losing its steam. Since we might all be here for a bit, we wanted to bring in a couple of experts to check in on the state of play, how organizations can maintain a strong human connection in a separated virtual world, and how we can tell just what doesn't work as well virtually. So joining me now, Jason Fried is co-founder and CEO of Basecamp, author of several books, including Rework and Remote Office Not Required. And Laszlo Bock is co-founder and CEO of Humu, former senior vice president of people operations at Google, and author of Work Rules. Both joining me remotely from home. Laszlo, you got some nice artwork there behind you.
Yeah, my kids all went to the same school, so each of them at the same age did self-portraits. So there's 3 of them up there. My giant head's in the way of one of them.
Well, I guess we can do them over time as long as we're kind of stuck at home and see how their self-concept changes. But let's talk about what you're doing at Humu, trying to help people, companies, organizations adapt to different ways of working in kind of a data-based format with nudges. And how has that been working under this work situation that for most of us, for the huge majority, is largely new?
Yeah, it's an incredibly trying situation for everybody. This is new even for people who are used to working remotely, because the rest of the teams are remote as well. One of the things we've been doing at Humu is we use nudges, small interventions, to make people generally happier and more productive at work. And we actually launched a solution around crisis resilience nudges, where people get customized nudges, emails, text messages, what have you, that help them not only improve their well-being, but also actually perform better as team members and collaborators. So it's just simple reminders that come at the right time to help you show up better in an incredibly stressful time. And we're finding a pretty tremendous impact on that.
And Jason, Basecamp is all about remote work. You've seen a big surge in inbound interest in the tools that you provide. What do people need the most? What are they least equipped for right now?
I think a lot of people are trying to simulate the office, the physical office, and that really doesn't work so well. I think that's kind of what people are struggling with right now. Is they're not really just transitioning; they're scrambling to figure out how to do this. So I think what people really need is just a central place they can trust, where all the information goes that people need. So versus spreading information out across a bunch of different products and a bunch of different places, you want one place where everyone can go and get the to-dos they need to do, have discussions with their team, make decisions, see what everyone else is working on. You want one place for that. And I find that the more tools you have and the more separate places, the more chaos you're actually creating for yourself. So I'd encourage everyone to simplify right now and not try to go too broad with too many tools.
Now, Jason, it seems to me like right now is a pretty unique situation because, as Laszlo was saying, kind of everybody is working remote. Everybody's working from home. And I'm hearing all of these projections and guesses about how this is going to change everything. But I also think that once we move to a mode where a bunch of people go back to normal, to working from an office, this is going to get a lot more complicated because managers, organizations are going to have to wrap their minds, their heads around different ways of communicating with people. Do the people who are actually physically present get favoritism? Are they more eligible for promotion just because they're physically closer? What do you think organizations need to do if they do plan to work more remote into their culture after this? What do they need to do to make sure it's healthy when they do?
That's a great question. And it's something people are going to struggle with because there's going to be more of a hybrid. I think coming out of this, we'll have more of a hybrid situation where, like you said, some people will want to work from home a few days a week or whatever. So I think that the important thing is to maintain a single company culture in terms of where you work. So for example, if you use Basecamp or you use Slack or you use whatever tool you use to do your work, all the work should be happening in that tool. You don't want to have some work happening locally and then only the remote people use a separate tool. You want to make sure everyone's using the same thing and communicating the same way. So at Basecamp, we're a hybrid company, essentially. We have an office. Most people work remotely, though. And we don't have in-person meetings. So, because in-person meetings favor the people who were there. It's really awkward to have like 3 people in one place and 1 person on a video. So we write things up instead, and we distribute information to everybody the same way, regardless of where they are. So I think that's going to be a really important thing to get used to.
Laszlo, is that the way to do it? I mean, is that going to work for everyone? No in-person meetings if you've got a significant portion of your workforce remote. So kind of talk me through that, because you've certainly got insight into lots of different size, different culture organizations. And then maybe tell me what types of nudges are most needed right now.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to the CEO of a publicly held company this morning who was looking for some advice. And what he told me was that they went from nobody using remote tools, whether Basecamp, Slack, what have you, to 90% adoption overnight. They'd been at 20%. Suddenly, everybody who was resisting is using it. So there's definitely more usage. What will happen afterwards, though, I think you have to step back and think about what distance means. Psychologists actually talk about 3 kinds of distance: physical distance, emotional or physical distance, operational distance, and what they call affinity distance. So physical is what we're all feeling. Operational is, does the technology work? Is it hard to communicate? Affinity is a sense of trust and compassion and connection and accessibility to information. That's actually the thing that is the most powerful driver of performance, of innovation, of retention, of all kinds of goodness. And that's the thing that's most missing today. So the technology can fill the gap on the operational side, but the affinity needs to come from human beings actually finding new ways to interact. And some of those are some of the things that are being suggested here. But others are things, for example, one of the most powerful nudges we found that has the biggest reaction is we've reminded people to set up what we call virtual water coolers. So just set up a meeting and have it run on Zoom, on Hangouts, on whatever platform you want forever, right? Set up a 3-month-long meeting so anyone can just pop in and see when they need support. That reinforces affinity and kind of replicates that randomness and serendipity you have when people bump into one another. There's another nudge we've been sending that people are really, it seems to be resonating more with very senior executives, ironically, which is around take a deep breath. Senior executives are, I don't want to play the violin for senior executives, but there's difficult decisions being made about the fate of companies and the fate of people. And sometimes the reminder to just kind of take a deep breath and remember you got to put your people first, you got to do the right thing, is just what they need at just the right time.
Jason, finally, I find right now, and it's working for me at a personal level, I suspect it plays out more broadly, that I'm actually more in touch with close friends, family members who are physically really distant during this time. And I think it's because I can't be physically close with acquaintances who are usually around. So if I've got to reach out to somebody who's physically inaccessible, might as well be the people who are the very closest to me. If this has kind of workplace professional implications for the remote workforce, when some people are remote and some people are physically present, it seems like that's going to be really complicated to manage, just kind of like on a psychological level, how close people feel to each other and how that influences the way they interact.
Yeah, yes, I agree. Although I would say that people are pretty adaptable. I mean, everyone right now is being thrown into a brand new situation and they're going to adapt. And in a few weeks, it's going to feel normal. And when we go back to the old way or the other way or the hybrid way or whatever new way comes out of this, that'll be an adjustment as well, and we'll adapt. I mean, as if we're anything as a species, we're adaptable. I do think what you're feeling, though, is this idea that there's kind of care in the air. You know, everyone sort of is looking out for each other right now. And I think hopefully that is one of the legacies that comes out of this, which is people's concern for one another. And also from a leadership management perspective, I hope that leaders are very empathetic right now and give people space and time, because especially for working parents, you're a full-time parent now and you have to work a full-time job. Like, something's going to have to give. There's no way you can do both of those at once. And I think work has to give a little bit. I think people need to, managers and leaders need to give their employees a little bit more space, a little bit more time to figure out how this is going to work out for a while. And which means we got to dial back our ambition a little bit, leave some space open for people to figure this stuff out. And that, to me, is the care in the air for managers and for leaders.
Give me one soft skill before we go, starting with you, Laszlo, that organizations really need to work on, maybe with management first, but with workers as well, so that they are better equipped to deal with the types of interactions we're going to need in this future we're entering, where some are more remote, some are present. Maybe we have to be prepared to shift kind of modalities at a moment's notice. What's the main soft skill people need to train on?
The main soft skill people need to train on is empathy. It's basically releasing your agenda, and at the start of every interaction, you just listen. People who are freaked out and scared are not going to be productive. They're not going to be effective. They're not going to move in any cohesive direction. And the human thing, the kind thing, the caring thing is to start with, how are you doing? Let me just check in on you. So empathy is the number one thing people should be focused on right now. Everything else will follow from that.
You got anything besides empathy, Jason?
Yeah, that's such a good one. Just recognizing that things are different. That's it. You just got to recognize things are different right now, and we need to give people space and time to figure that out for themselves. Empathy, you can't beat that. So yeah, I'm on board with that as well.
Yeah, you kind of can't poo-poo empathy. Everybody, it's a good thing to have. Guys, I appreciate it. I really think that these tips, these skills, these ideas are going to be with us for a while, even if we really can't see exactly where this whole shift that we're experiencing right now is going to take us in the future. I have a feeling we're picking up skills and ideas that are going to be very useful. Thank you so much, Jason Fried, Laszlo Bock.
Jason, Laszlo, and John, thank you. That was 3 cheers for empathy. I'll add a 4th. That makes 4 cheers for empathy. And I've certainly seen it around my workplace. We're all working under stress, but I have not really seen a crossword between individuals in my workplace, and I'm very grateful for that. On the other hand, I've been an irritable, well, whatever. At any rate, we're going to move on now and look at what's next in work, how to thrive in the new normal. However we emerge from what's going on right now, normal is going to be different. It's going to be a different kind of working environment, one way or another, whether we go back to our offices and our old ways, or we integrate some of the new ways we've learned to collaborate and operate together. It is stressful. It is stressful. People are feeling a lot of tension. In a national study from Thrive Global done just a couple of weeks ago of 5,000 employees, 80%, 4 out of 5 say they feel helpless, that things are out of their control. And why shouldn't they? In lots of ways, things really are out of their control right now. And 85% say they wish their employer could do more to help them adapt and manage. So where do we begin understanding and responding to these stresses, to the practicalities of the way work may evolve? And now we're going to hear from two people who've thought a lot about it. They're going to engage in a conversation. Arianna Huffington is the founder and CEO of Thrive Global, and that really shortchanges all of the amazing things she's done over her remarkable life. And Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC's Squawk Box. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Tyler. And thank you, Arianna, my good friend Arianna, for doing this. We are all trying to figure out what the new version of work-life balance is. And if there's one expert in the world on work-life balance, it is Arianna Huffington. So thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
You're in Los Angeles. I'm in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about how well the work-life balance is going, because I'll tell you right now, I'm not even sure what day it is. And the weekend has blended to the week. And I don't think there's any balance, at least going on in this household.
Well, you have younger children than I have, so your life is harder. Working from home with young children is hard. At Thrive, we've created an entire track to help parents working from home with young children. My children are out of college. I'm very lucky that they're here with me, but they're actually adding to my life by cooking, doing laundry, and things like that. The main thing for me has been managing all our Thrive employees scattered all around the world. And I love what Laszlo said. Empathy is a primary qualification for leadership right now. But also, Andrew, a lot of the things that you and I have talked about, a lot of the things that Thrive is about, how can we show up at work really recharged and connected with our own wisdom, with our own sense of creativity and empathy, are now indispensable. They are not any longer just nice things to have. Because when we are frazzled, when we are exhausted, it's super hard to be empathetic. And it's very hard to be creative and deal with the growing stresses of living in these very uncertain times. Beyond our own stresses, we also are reading constantly about the latest coronavirus deaths, the latest deaths, the latest stock market drops. So all that adds to that generic atmosphere of stress. And in that survey that we are doing with Qualtrics and SAP every day to track the experiences of employees, we see different stages. When you begin working from home, the second week when a lot of the problems start setting in, ranging from aches and pains because you've been working from your couch, to the COVID-19, putting on weight because you're stress eating and your refrigerator is too close, to moving now for many of us to the third week when you create new structures. And we are tracking that every day, and it's actually free. Any company can join us in taking this survey in the same way that the Qualtrics remote work pulse is free. And now employers find they need more data than ever to manage well.
Okay, so tell us a couple of the strategies, successful strategies that either you're employing or you've heard others are employing for those managers and executives and CEOs who are watching us now, that maybe they should be employing to help deal with their employee base.
Great. We have 3 tracks, and we are very happy to make them available pro bono. This is the time to help each other. The first one is a combination of micro steps, tiny daily incremental steps, and content that backs up the micro steps with all the scientific data. And the first one is around how can you help yourself and your physical immunity and mental resilience. We have all the data that shows that building our own immunity is going to be critical in dealing with the virus if we're exposed to it, and in determining how serious it's going to be. And unfortunately, all the same things that we've been talking about that are important in normal times, sleep, avoiding sugar, moving, and avoiding a barrage of negative thoughts, are now more important than ever and harder than ever. So we have micro steps to help here, and let me just give you a couple. One is pick a cutoff point when you stop consuming CNBC, the Huffington Post, CNN, and all the latest coronavirus news. Because if there is no cutoff point and you go from a stressful piece of news, and that's hard to avoid, to trying to turn off the light and going to sleep, it's going to be much harder to go to sleep. And the second point is to recognize that it takes 60 seconds to actually course correct from stress. Stress is unavoidable in the best of times, especially now. So all of us are getting stressful news throughout the day. Instead of just going from one Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting to another, take literally 60 seconds to breathe deeply and consciously and course correct. It sounds very simple, it's meaningful, and it makes a real difference, and it takes 60 seconds, so it's not too long. The second track we have is working remote, working from home, and micro steps to deal with that. People are having a super hard time moving. So create an alarm where you get up every hour, and even if you just move around your desk, or make some of your calls to be real calls so that you can take them while walking. Some strategies that actually help you move. And the second thing, I mean, we have dozens of micro steps, but I'll mention 2 in each track. The second thing is to create an accountability body at work where you support each other. So you check in on each other. Have you moved today? How many Oreo cookies have you had? Have you thought of swapping some of your sugary favorites with something else? And again, micro steps and support. Our third track is specifically for leaders, because leadership is more important than ever. And yet leaders are now more stressed than ever. I have had many webinars with the Global Management Committee at Accenture, with leaders at Salesforce, etc. And a lot of the things that we hear in normal times, like I'm working 24/7, I'm always on, I can't disconnect, there's so much on my plate, are now almost universal. So we need a new playbook of leadership. And the first micro step. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. No, keep going. I apologize.
The first micro step here is a mindset shift. We need to stop believing that in order to be a great leader, we need to be on 24/7, because that's almost a recipe for not being a great leader. Because the first thing that disappears when we are depleted is our creativity and our ability to innovate in moments of crisis like that. And so second micro step for leaders is, remember, everything may appear urgent, but not everything has the same urgency. Being able to prioritize between what is truly important for the business, for your employees, and what appears incredibly urgent.
Okay, so I have a different question for you, which is, you and I have talked for many years about screen time. We've talked about screen time in the context of children. We can talk about that, but we've also talked about it in the context of ourselves. And many years ago, you gave me a little bed where I was going to put my phone before I go to bed so it would stay out of my room, so I would go to sleep without the blue light and all of that. We could talk about that. But I want to know, in this world, now that the only way to really have genuine, I don't even know if it's genuine, but human interaction, the interaction that we're doing now, requires screens, and basically screens all day. So has your view of screens changed at all?
No, not really. I mean, we've always loved screens for all the good things that technology can bring in our lives. But now it's actually more important than ever at some point to disconnect from screens and reconnect with ourselves. It really goes back to a fundamental philosophical truth, which is that all of us, of whatever religion, nationality, etc., have, by virtue of our birthright, a place of wisdom, peace, and strength in us. We need to tap into that place more than ever right now in order to deal with this crisis. And that means taking some time away from screens to connect to that place. And I love reading biographies of great leaders in moments of crisis to be inspired by. And of course, as you know, because we've talked about that, Andrew, Marcus Aurelius is my all-time favorite because he was the emperor of Rome for 19 years and he dealt with plagues and invasions and betrayals, and he made a point every day of reconnecting with that part of himself, writing about it in a book called Meditations that I highly recommend for any leader watching. Or read Churchill's biography, any one of them, about his power naps. Again, he took time to power nap and recharge in order to make the best decision.
Okay, I have a different question. We're getting some questions in from the audience that's watching, and so I'm going to ask you a couple of them. And it was something that I'm selfishly and just generally very interested in. Should workers who are working from home be expected to work a typical work day, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 8 to 5, whatever that day is, or should managers be flexible about the work hours? And how do you do it if you have to do it idiosyncratically for each employee individually? I'm dealing right now with online Zoom school with my children, and every other day they seem to either be done at 2:30 like normal, or all of a sudden they're done at 11 o'clock in the morning, where now they need help with their homework, things that happen but typically happened at night in the past.
So I think what we need to give all employees is cultural permission to speak up and tell us what they need. And that means if your child suddenly needs you because of what happens in your life, Andrew, or because they are not feeling well, then that employee needs to feel that they have the permission to reach out to their manager and say that they will be offline for whatever reason. But once we give that cultural permission, then the onus is on each employee to speak up and ask for what they need. If they need to talk to someone, because even before this crisis, we're dealing with the ravages of a mental health crisis. Now that's accelerating because the levels of anxiety are skyrocketing. So if they want to talk to someone, we have made our lead facilitator available that they can talk to. We have launched a big program called Thriving Mind in partnership with Stanford to all 500,000 Accenture employees, for example. So giving them the resources to deal with growing anxiety and the permission to speak up and express whatever it is that they're going through.
Right. Let me ask you a different question. It's really about the future of work, and it's really something that's come up in so many other conversations, which is, are you a believer that the future of work is going to fundamentally change, that this remote Zoom experience or WebEx experience that we're having now is the future of work? And I want to read you something that we found before I came to talk to you, which was an old quote from Steve Jobs before he passed away. He said, "There's a temptation in our networked age to think that ideas can be developed by email and iChat." You remember iChat? "That's crazy," he says. "Creativity comes from spontaneous meetings, from random discussions. You run into someone, you ask them how they're doing, you say, wow, and soon you're cooking up some ideas." And so I wonder whether the future of work really is going to change and whether it can change.
I think the future of work is going to change and the future of life is going to change. And part of what Steve Jobs said about how the best ideas come up, in another context, he also said that his best ideas came after meditation. And many of us, even if we don't meditate, can testify to the fact that our best ideas come in the shower or while fly fishing, or basically while we're disconnected from our screens and all the ways in which we are hyper connected in a modern life. So I think during this period, because unfortunately, through crisis come some new opportunities and some new and much needed ways to relate to each other. So when we are out of this, as Andrew Cuomo actually said yesterday, we are not going back to normal. We are going to a new normal, and both at work and in life. And one of the fundamental delusions that has been driving us all, which is that in order to be successful, we basically need to be on all the time. I think that's going to be completely sacrificed, because we are all seeing much more clearly the price we pay for that.
Two other very quick questions, and then I'll let you go to your next Zoom call. But here it is. This comes from the audience. What are the key signs, and this is important actually for any manager out there, actually, or any other employee, to watch for remotely, now that we're doing remotely, indicating that someone is in trouble from a mental health perspective, especially given these difficult times and challenging times we're in?
Well, first of all, I think really looking at them and looking into their eyes. You know, it's interesting because we can actually really look into each other's eyes in these Zoom or WebEx calls. We're working with Cisco, Andrew, so I have to keep mentioning WebEx, you understand?
Yes.
So it's really important to really look and really listen to what they're saying and to what they're not saying. And that, again, requires us not to be depleted, because when we are depleted ourselves, we're going to miss all these signs, because very often they can be very subtle. Very often it's what not being said that managers need to be listening for. And that's now more important than ever. Here's what is actually really good news, that if we're in this crisis in 2008, when we were in the financial crisis, we would not have as managers the tools to deal with that effectively. But between 2008 and now, there's been so much discussion around mental health, destigmatizing it, opening up the conversation, that managers are much more prepared to deal with the levels of stress, anxiety, and mental health signs by their employees.
Ariana, I want to thank you so very much for joining us. I also want to tell you, because you've been on me about my sleep for a very long time, that the good news is that I'm sleeping probably a good extra half hour a day, because I do the morning show, but I just come down here. I come downstairs, so there's no commute. And so maybe you could talk to my boss when hopefully we can go outside. The basement situation may be still okay.
Exactly. You look great, sound great. Why not?
You look great and sound great, and we appreciate it. Stay safe and healthy out there. Really appreciate it. I'm going to kick it back to Tyler now. Thank you so very much.
And thank you as well from me, Ariana. Andrew, let me hold you on the line for just a second as we chat just a minute. How are you doing, and what have you found to be the most stressful parts of this sort of enforced work zone that we are all working in, and on the other hand, enjoyable or liberating parts of it, apart from sleep?
So, in a very strange way, doing the show has been fun and really interesting, and I've enjoyed that whole experience very, very much. We're doing the show in the basement. I'm in a rental house in Connecticut with my best friend. We had rented this house for the winter, actually, to go up on weekends with our kids to take them skiing. And funnily enough, the lease ended the week before all of this, since we re-rented the house. So we have about, by the way, we have 10 people in this house. You could probably hear maybe some kids upstairs running around. Usually they're not running during squawk box in the morning. The greatest challenge is I work, my wife works. We have 3 kids. My best friend has 3 kids as well. And so just keeping everybody on a schedule throughout the day, and actually being able to get work done throughout the day, doing my reporting, doing some of the writing that I like to do, organizing for the next day. There's just so many times in the middle of the day where I get drawn into something else. One of my sons needs help with a math project. Actually, that's what I'm going to do after I see you. I've had to move conference calls around and all sorts of different things. And it's funny, you'd think you'd have more time. I think we all think we would have had more time being stuck at home. And I feel like I have less time than I've ever had in my life. So
you exercise,
the best thing I do every day is I've actually just taken up jogging. I go jogging for about a half an hour and kind of tries to clear my head. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of people actually are exercising more because they have some time to do it. And what the heck else are you going to do? Andrew, I can't wait to see you in person again soon.
I look forward to that. You're doing an awesome job, Tyler. Thanks for doing this.
And you, my friend. Take care. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of this virtual at work event. We really appreciate your time, your joining us today. Thank you so much for being with us. And we want to thank once again our sponsors, Workday, who's been with us from Coupa, the Society for Human Resource Management, T-Mobile for Business, and ZipRecruiter. We've got another at-work conference. This one will be on October 6th in person. We certainly hope at Brooklyn, and we look forward to seeing you all there. We'll have another fascinating agenda, October 6th, across the East River in Brooklyn. Meantime, our next virtual event couldn't be more timely. It's called Healthy Returns. I think it is the third or fourth edition of that. It is on May 12th. We'll be talking to healthcare executives who are at the center of the fight against coronavirus. For more information on all of our live and virtual events, you can check it out at cnbcevents.com. We've got also a 7 p.m. special tonight on CNBC television network as we've been doing it. As we look forward on the path forward for business, we'll hear from the Prophet's Marcus Lemonis. We'll also hear from Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary and Facebook's Chief Operating Officer, Sheryl Sandberg, with details on what her company is doing and has done. So we hope you can join us tonight at 7 p.m. And if you'd like to rewatch this particular event, you can go to cnbc.com/work. The event will be archived there, so you can do that. I want to thank you all very much for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and we will hope to see you in person soon. Have a pleasant day.